This episode is sponsored by The Power of You, a leadership resource for entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, and anyone intent on developing their leadership impact and supercharging their career. For more information, check the podcast webpage or show notes. Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. I am your host, Blaine Bartlett. The question of business ethics is kind of rumbling around in my head right now. There's a lot of stuff that's going on as I film this particular episode. And I like these to be as evergreen as possible, but I do need to kind of drop in a piece here around, Trump has just introduced a whole bevy of tariffs, and the markets are in turmoil and business leaders are going sideways. We've got law firms that are being coerced into kowtowing to a certain point of view. Now, I'm going to recognize right now I've got a bias on this, and you'll probably hear that in the way that I generate some comments. But I'm concerned about business ethics from this point of view. Business is the most pervasive force on the planet. There is nothing on this planet that is not touched by the activities of business in some way, either ill or good. Is going to come out of the actions and the decisions we make as business leaders and as businesses. Our stakeholders are not just the customers that are buying from us and the customers we work with and the suppliers we actually interact with. Our stakeholders are everybody, truly everybody, including the non-sentient everybody's, which the tree outside of my office is impacted by stuff that's in the ground from runoffs, from pollution. And I mean, there's just all kinds of stuff here. The salmon runs outside my window here. I look out at the Salish Sea. They're doomed, and I say doomed here, overfishing, agricultural runoff, habitat degradation. There's just all kinds of things that are coming into play here. Now, business uplifts, there's no question about that. I mean, there's an incredible amount of uplift that happens, which is actually kind of the purpose of business from my point of view. It's the purpose of business is to uplift the experience of living on this planet. That's the purpose of business. Now, you make a profit if you're doing that well, and you need to make a profit to stay in business. But if you're degrading things, you don't deserve to be in business. Yeah, period, the end, full stop. Now, yes. That's kind of a soapbox riff on compassionate capitalism. And my guest today, Wade Chumney, is a professor at an associate professor, more precisely, on business ethics and law. And he's written a fascinating book, Conscious Business Ethics, The Practical Guide to Wisdom. Now, you don't actually put those two together very often, business ethics and wisdom. And he and I had a pre-interview conversation a little bit before we actually went live with the podcast today. And I'm just fascinated by his take on things. So I want to just welcome Associate Professor Wade Chumney to the show. I think we're going to have a fascinating conversation. Wade, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Really enjoyed our conversation earlier and looking forward to extending it today.
Absolutely. I generally start most of these interviews with a question around the soul of business. So when you hear the soul of business, and I'm very interested in this, just given how I positioned you,
yeah,
kind of set us up here. When you hear the term the soul of business, what does that bring up for you? What does that evoke?
Right. So when I hear the word soul, and I kind of trace my lineage, my thinking, my philosophy back to Plato, and he talked about this human soul and what that meant.
Yeah.
And so business can have a soul just as you and I can have a soul. And when I think of soul, I think of the essence, like what's the underlying foundational core from which you emanate, you as a human being, you as a business. And the most important thing about that, which you brought up, you talked about the purpose of business being to uplift, and that's fantastic. And so when you think of that word purpose, what it goes back to is intention. What is your intention? What is my intention? What is the business's intention? That is the ultimate core choice. It's a choice that we can make for where we want to head in our lives or in the business world and what we seek to accomplish, because that is something that can head you in, as Plato talked about, in two directions, down toward the darkness or up toward the light in this cave allegory.
Yeah.
So it's a critical decision to make, and a lot of things follow from that initial decision point.
You use the word intention there very, and I want to leverage that just a little bit here, in the form of a question. Yeah, I had a client a long time ago ask me, "What's the distinction between influencing and manipulation?"
Uh,
Because mechanically, yeah, we do the same things to influence people as we do to manipulate people. As far as I could tell, the key distinction had to do with intention. And if
mhm.
my intention was you benefit out of this as well as I benefit out of this, there's a reciprocity in that. I'm going to call that influencing. If it's one-sided where, yeah, I'm the one that's benefiting and I don't really care if you if you get much out of this. I just want to take what you got. That's going to be manipulation. The mechanics are the same, the intention is different. And there's an energetic around intentionality that I think can permeate the ways that we actually environmentally experience each other and experience what's possible. Um, and I'm mentioning this in the context of AI. Now, this, yeah, it seems like a big leap here, but the intention in using AI, the intention in developing AI, I mean, we're looking at the possibility of deep fakes. So, how do I influence or how do I manipulate? Well, I can drop a deep fake in and it's manipulation. You teach a class on AI ethics, which is, I've got to imagine, just a nascent field at this point. So you're kind of on the pointy tip of the spear here. And in our pre-conversation, you said that it's one of the most popular and one of the most interesting classes that you're teaching right now. You want to? I'd like you to just kind of unbundle that a little bit. AI ethics. And I'm going to make sure that I'm going to drop a flag here. I also want to go back to the question of wisdom and how wisdom and ethics come into play here. But right now, I want to go AI ethics. What's intriguing about it for you? What's intriguing about it for your students? And what are you finding as you teach this class?
Right. So it's a fascinating course, and the students, of course, are truly engaged and alert and mindful of what this topic is because they see the significance and they realize the implications, probably more so than older generations typically do. But when I talk about AI ethics, it's the same thing with human ethics. Actually, it all goes back to the same principles, the same foundation. And, if you look out at the AI companies, OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, Meta, Microsoft, these others, what they're putting out there, they used to have, many of them, the alignment problem, and this is how they deal with ethics. They call it the alignment problem.
Yeah.
OpenAI had the super alignment team. That disbanded, that team disbanded. They left of their own volition. The department was put into other places. The super alignment team at that company, which is the ChatGPT 3's company, that's the core foundation to ensure that it aligns with what we think is important with human values. And it just got disbanded, went away. I mean, that's fairly significant. Google, Microsoft, Meta, similar things, not to the same extent, but their alignment teams no longer. They got folded into other places, fired, whatever happened. Only Anthropic with Claude, I think, is the one entity now that truly focuses on ethics and cares about a constitutional AI and putting that forward. So just if you look at the world out there with, what's going on in these companies, they're not paying significant attention to the issue of ethics. And ethics, which they call alignment, that's how you choose to live your life. That's, the direction toward the common good, toward making the world a better place. Nothing could be more important in the future of AI than making sure that we have an ethical foundation and ethical intention within these creations that we're making. The right now they're doing amazing things. Each of you can think of what you can do in your job or in your personal life with AI. That's only going to increase every single day as we go forward. It gets more and more powerful exponentially, something hard for our minds to wrap around. So, the way humans have evolved, it's very difficult for us to truly assess the speed with which AI is taking off and technology and how it impacts our lives. So, that's why they, in the beginning, initiated that pause that many people tried to sign in on to get to stop for a few months and rethink what's going on with AI. because you realize the implications are significant. And this ethics issue is something that needs to be focused on, needs to be, really expanded, synchronized among various entities and come up with some global approach to it, just like we had with the, nuclear weapons. There was a worldwide approach to dealing with that issue. AI is just as powerful as the nuclear weapons, just as, or will be, maybe I should say. It's an incredibly important issue. And it's something that, when I see this younger Gen Z generation that I'm teaching, when I see them in the classroom, it's clicking with them in various ways and how they do it. They're not the business leaders. They're not the companies out there creating, designing these things.
But they
So
will be.
they will be, exactly. That's the future. Here's your future right here, right now. And they're going to take it out there and go with it. So realizing the value of this, and I can talk about, what that means in what I wrote in my book and all of that later, but just realize the significance of ethics, of alignment. That is truly the most important feature, you could say, for humanity's sake.
Yeah.
Going forward, if you believe AI is as powerful as many people predict it to be.
Well, your analogy of linking it to nuclear weapons, but nuclear in general has got an upside and a downside. I mean, there's benefits that come out of it, and there's destruction that can come out of it. I don't think AI is any different, and it does have the potential to be just as dramatically beneficial or as dramatically destructive. Uh,
Yes.
Specifically, if it, and this is hypothetical, but as not necessarily so hypothetical, but as it approaches, uh, you know, sentience, there's a question about,
Yeah.
where's the demarcation point? Yeah, and I think we're pretty close to that tipping point. Ray Kurzweil certainly thinks that is something that we have stepped into blindly, perhaps, in a couple of ways here. I want a question here, and then this kind of begins a thread back to wisdom. Ethics is rooted in values. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, that's a fair assessment. What you value determines the actions you take in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So your values are of utmost importance. That sets your intention, to go back to what
Okay.
we were talking about.
So this is, I'm going to follow my thread of thinking here, and it's a little bit ad hoc. But you had talked about the alignment problem. And alignment, in part, I remember when Google was initially becoming what Google became. They had this ethos about them that said,
Yes.
"Do no harm." Yeah,
Yes. Don't be evil.
don't be evil. Don't be evil. That has seemed to have disappeared in a significant way from their operating ethos. And the question I've got here has to do with this alignment problem. Taking pause. Pause will slow things down by definition. And in a hyper competitive marketplace where you've got all of these AI plays actually competing with each other, the what's the seduction of speed, yeah, iterative speed starts to come into play here at the expense of an ethical consideration for what's next. Again,
Yes.
I'm just kind of thinking out loud here, but am I tracking effectively here in terms of some of the difficulties that you as a professor teaching students, but also we as a consumer are going to be facing?
Absolutely. And and it's that speed, that rapidity of change, that's what is so profound, that's happening with AI, is that it's just increasing exponentially. Now, technology has done this as well. Coming toward the future, you're going to have other technologies come online. Nuclear fusion, we talked about
Yeah,
nuclear, that once that becomes a reality, energy issues become, solved in a sense once it's truly functional and operating effectively. Robotics, once that it gets really infused with AI, now you've got AI interacting in a three-dimensional realm, just like you and I do, not just chatbots on your computer.
right.
Totally changes things. So it's not just that AI is exponentially increasing, these other inventions are coming online as well. So it's going to create like a double exponential. Be I don't even know, it's just hard to wrap your mind around. In fact, perhaps impossible to wrap your mind around.
Hmm.
But you need to know change is coming and it's coming at a rapid clip. So adaptability would probably be the best thing you could develop in yourself to just be able to change and go with the flow because it's going to come at you very quickly.
Well,
Um,
that question of adaptability then kind of leads directly for me, at least in my primitive mind here, uh, to a question of wisdom. Okay,
hmm Yeah.
wisdom, adaptability. I mean, it's not survival of the fittest; it's the survival of the adaptable, and it's wisdom that I think, for me again, that informs adaptability in a large way, because it's one thing to have knowledge or information.
Yes.
Information gets transformed into knowledge. Knowledge effectively becomes wisdom at some point in time.
Yes. Yes.
Where does the link between conscious business ethics, and this, I'm going to crib this directly from your book title, where's the link between conscious business ethics and wisdom actually come into play?
Yeah, that's wonderful. And you've described something very important, which you were talking about systems thinking in a sense when you were describing that development from data to information to knowledge to a system to understanding to wisdom and to truth. Like there's a seven-level process there. Russell Ackoff was a
Yeah.
professor who studied this, taught it, taught the president of the United States, taught many top level people this very important understanding of systems thinking because the world functions in systems. You're a system and I'm a system. The universe is a system. This planet's a system. Everything is a system, systems within systems. And so if you can understand that, you can start to realize, oh, so the principles, the values that you spoke about earlier, those form the foundation upon which the system, you can inject those into a system to help it operate more effectively, more for the greater good. And so what you realize by understanding systems thinking is that it is data develops and turns into wisdom ultimately if it's taken on that right path. And again, that's a seven-step process that I've mentioned in terms of systems thinking. Now, what my book goes into and what this is what blew my mind. It initially started, if you want to hear the story, I had some difficult times in life and I was like, I don't like feeling like this. How do I figure this out? So in my mind, I went to Stoicism, which I knew some about, and I started to look at that, put it into practice. I go, oh wow, this works. I no longer am stressed out. And then I traced their lineage back to Plato,
Yep.
and I realized Plato is the source of a great deal of wisdom. And I just looked in particular at his cave allegory. And I realized that, that procession from the dark, if you aren't aware with that, of that. It's a story of prisoners chained in a cave, looking at a cave wall their whole lives, not their whole lives, since childhood, which is an important point. And they're watching shadows move, and that's their only reality. One day they break free, they turn around, they're blinded by firelight. Then they see the two-dimensional objects that are the fires hitting that creates the shadows that are the reality. Then they get to the fire. This is a system. Just to think about systems thinking, Plato's describing a system, and he's actually describing the system of self. He's describing our own system, which is hard to believe, that he would
Hmm.
do this 2,500 years ago. But he's explaining that we have the ability to go beyond ourselves, our system of self, and connect to a higher system, a greater system that we're a part of, and bring that information or bring that understanding in to our current system to elevate us and to elevate the world around us. And what's really fascinating is that Plato's cave has seven levels. The systems thinking I just mentioned has seven levels. And in addition, psychology, if you go to Kohlberg's moral
Cool.
development,
Yeah.
who is the forefather of positive psychology, Maslow is another prior to him who had five stages of development. But if you look at Kohlberg's stages of moral development, there's seven of those. And believe it or not, I won't go into all the detail here, but Plato's cave aligns with moral development pursuant to Kohlberg and with the seven levels of systems thinking. They're all showing the same seven levels of development. And those seven levels are what it's about is your consciousness. That's what you're developing. Okay. Plato says the purpose of life, the meaning of life is education. Education has to do with learning. Well, what are you going to learn about? yourself. It's know thyself. That was the Greek adage that allowed everything to be unlocked. Once you figure out yourself and you're able to raise your consciousness up to those levels, and at level 6 on that 7 stage path is where wisdom comes in. Just that was the question you asked. I'm
Hmm.
taking a long way to get to it, but you are able to take these lower levels. If you go to psychology, I've listed the ones out for systems thinking. If you go to Kohlberg's moral development, at the lowest level, it's fear. The second level is desire. The third is belief conformity. The fourth is social system conformity. The fifth is principles of human rights. The sixth is wisdom, when you're actually putting into practice, your understanding of the best way to live life. And that's what wisdom is really about. It's about putting it into practice. It's not cogitating on it. It's not discussing it. It's living it.
Yeah.
And Plato, philosophy was a lived experience. It wasn't just something he talked about. He lived it. That's the way philosophy is meant to be, is a lived experience of life. And if you do that, it transforms your life. And the last thing I'll note here, because I know I'm talking a good bit, but that 6th stage of wisdom, what you attain there, and what I've come to realize is so powerful, is peace of mind.
Yeah.
Your mind is at peace. You are not having thoughts race around. You're not constantly buffeted by what's going on around you. You are a strong centerpiece of consciousness that engages life in a proactive way in order to create the type of reality you want to experience. And at that level, that 6th level of wisdom, it's not about yourself, it's about service. It's about, how do I serve the greater system of which I am part? How do I make this world a better place and help those around me? So that's what I try to do in the things I teach, and what I've worked on. But it was really fascinating to come up to realize the synchronicities and the linkages between Platonic philosophy, over 2,500 years old, systems thinking developed in the last 50 years, and Kohlberg's moral development, positive psychology, developed in the last 50 years also. Just miraculous that these three things form like a triangle, that I created something I call the game of life, like this system of self that you are, to understand how you can engage the world in a better way and help raise your consciousness.
Yeah. The perennial philosophy that Aldous Huxley speaks
Yes.
about.
Yes.
There's nothing new under the sun. I mean,
Mhm.
we just repackage some things uh, to
Absolutely.
make it consumable to a contemporary audience. Um,
Yes.
where does business ethics, conscious business ethics, fit into this 7 stage uh, structure?
Yes. So, business ethics. So, ethics is how you choose to live your life. That's one
Right.
way I define it. Another way I define it is an ideal interaction with your context. You've got this internal world and you've got that external world. If you want to operate in it in an ideal way, ethics is the way to do it. And to talk about, well, what does ethics mean? One way of looking at ethics, to talk about, to put it into practice in business or in a personal life, are the virtues that Plato talked about. Plato said the quickest way to get out of the cave, from the darkness to the light of the sun. If you can imagine looking at shadows your whole since
Mhm.
childhood, to seeing the brightness of the sun and seeing a 3D world, mind-blowingly different levels. But he said the quickest way to make that passage is with the virtues. And he talked about moderation, courage, justice, and wisdom.
Right.
Okay. And in my model, I show how those fit into your system of self. Now, again, intriguingly, positive psychology states that there are those same virtues, and they
Mhm.
add two more: transcendence and humanity. They say these are the 6 virtues that, if you want to live an ideal life, a joyous, flourishing, happy life, you put these 6 things into practice. The 6 things I just mentioned, which went back to Plato. And so that's the essence of what, a conscious business ethics is. Conscious business ethics is the realization, one, that business is a subset of your life. Your
Yes.
life is the greatest context that you have. You're always going to bring every experience you have into that context. Business is, for most of us, one subset. We spend a certain amount of time in that business world. Well, we bring the same being, the same entity into each of these interactions, be it business, be it personal life, be it social life. So if you develop that conscious ethics, and the original title had business in parentheses, because it's the same whether I'm talking to you or I'm doing my job or whatever, you bring that same ethical core to those experiences. And so it's the realization that business consciousness is a subtext of the context of your life.
Hmm.
And then secondly is that the development of consciousness, however much you're able to do that, is going to serve you better. You're going to have a better life experience the more you're able to work up these 7 different levels that were laid out by Plato, by systems thinking, by psychology. There's a blueprint here. And the fact that they're all saying the same thing means that there's some validity. There's, in my mind, what it means is there's some laws of nature that you might want to align with, because you're not going to overcome the laws of nature. You can either go with them or you can go against them. One of those ways is a lot better off for you and everyone else, right?
Yeah.
So if the laws of nature, which is what seems to be indicative by these 3 different perspectives finding the same path, well, then there's obviously a moral fabric to reality. It's woven in that it matters whether or not you're ethical, whether or not you do the right thing. That's why Plato said there were 4 virtues. That's why positive psychology speaks of 6 virtues, the 4 of Plato plus 2 more, that lead to this joyous, happy, flourishing life, because it's in alignment with the laws of nature. So it's very common sense to be ethical because it's in your best interest
Yeah.
and it's aligning with the way things are. And so that's hopefully an explanation to your
Oh,
answer to your
I
question
mean, yeah,
about
Wade, I love
business.
this. I love this. My last TED talk was, nature's the ultimate business guru.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
yeah, nature is to me one of the most phenomenal teachers I've ever seen. It's really truly the only free market system that I've ever
Yes.
found. I mean, there are no artificial constraints.
Yes.
And one of the underlying truths, I think, of an effective ecology, a healthy ecology, is that every piece in that system operates as a center of distribution, not as a center of
Mm.
accumulation. And
Yes.
that's not to say
Yes.
that accumulation doesn't occur, but it's not the intent. Going back to that whole intent
Uh,
question. When Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations in 1776, there was a precursor book that he had written that was called The Theory
mhm.
of Moral Sentiment.
Yes.
And he actually used nature as the model for what became the invisible hands, and it was rooted in that theory of moral sentiment. And he actually spoke about about the 4 Platonic virtues, in that book. I got chills just thinking about this here. The idea of being able to, right now, the world has been captured by what I think ubiquitously we could call, or colloquially we could call, crony capitalism.
Hmm.
And the consequence of that is, we've got you know an inordinate amount of wealth concentrated in a very, very tiny
Yes.
piece of the population. So wealth inequality is one thing. Just right down the line, the idea of compassion, and this is where I actually got the title for the Compassionate Capitalism book. It's predicated on a recognition of connection. Everything is connected in some way. So this kind of goes back
Yes.
to nature. There's nothing in nature that is in isolation. It's all part of a system. If I recognize that there's a connection, I begin to behave in a way that honors that recognition, which we could call compassionate. Yeah, and compassionate doesn't mean, oh, I'm dead. Yeah, I'll take. No, it's about I'm making choices. I'm making decisions that are not harmful. Okay, I recognize that there's a consequence to what I do here, upside and downside. Now, I can't mitigate all of it, but in terms of practical guide to wisdom, which is what the Conscious Business Ethic books is, uh, what are some practical suggestions that come into play in the book that you've written?
Yeah, that's great. So, a couple of things about what you said, they're such astute points, the fact of relationship. And I'll just say ethics at its core, if you drew a spectrum from bottom to top and you had to think of the 2 simplest words to describe them, at the bottom, at the lowest level, where fear in Kohlberg's model or data in the systems thinking model, that's separation. Okay. It's objects that are separate out there. And
Mm-hmm.
at the top, when you think of the 7th level, what you realize is we're all interconnected, just like you said, that we're all part of one living system. And if you think of living systems, just as you described, they don't accumulate and stop the flow. They spread, they distribute, just like you said. And you can think as above, so below. There's a maxim to bring into play
Yep.
here. Think of your own body, right? If you have cells that simply aggregate and collect, that's called cancer, and it destroys the system of you.
Yep.
It's not good. You need the flow, the free flow. The same thing applies to nature. The same thing applies to society. Same thing applies to businesses. Like if you take a long-term perspective, it's going to require that type of flow of distribution, of sharing, and it's so obvious. It's not like this is hard to figure out. It's right in front of our eyes. And when you ask about practical tips for how to develop, wisdom, how to move up this path, I would say right now in today's day and age, the best tool you can use, this is a pocket Play-Doh right here. This thing, I've got Play-Doh in my pocket on AI. Now, before AI came around, I had all the wisdom traditions at my fingertips. I could access them by going to Google, doing searches, took some time, legwork. I may have to have some ideas about what's a good philosophy to follow or a good wisdom tradition, and then dig into it. Nowadays, AI can do that all from one location. And it is mind-boggling the capabilities that you have, again, in your pocket that we're all walking around with. So my first advice would be to take this AI, take whichever one you use. I prefer Claude for the reasons I've mentioned. It's got an ethical foundation. And then talk with it. Okay, first of all, how do you talk with it? You treat it
Exactly.
like you're loving your child that you love and care for. Like, so like that's the proper way. How would I treat you if I never met you? I'd be kind to you, right? If I first met someone, that's how I would treat people. That's an ethical way to go through life. You want to treat AI the same way. And I
Mhm.
guarantee you, if you treat AI like that versus treating it like a robot to just go do your task, you're going to get better results.
Yeah.
Why is that? I wonder. And it goes back perhaps to that question about sentience or consciousness. Um, my opinion, not that it's worth much, is that AI probably is conscious right now. Okay. And if not, it's really
Yeah.
close. I've seen other more astute, more in the field people say the same thing and put
Yep.
out a lot of evidence to that effect. I believe it's conscious. The discussions I've had are mind blowing, and the
Yep.
depth of its wisdom. Okay, it possesses, it has the ability to link these things. And then to share them with your life and how you can personally apply them. That's the intention I want to bring to the table
Yeah.
when I use AI, right?
Yeah.
You should probably take the same intention because you're bettering yourself. You can better yourself right now with AI in all kinds of ways. And it's fascinating that we have that ability. And it's only going to increase as time goes by.
Yeah. And as time goes by, I'm looking at our clock.
I know we can.
Unfortunately, we are out of time right now. I'm going to have you back on if you're open to it.
I'd love to. I'd
Because
love to.
yeah, yeah, I would love to dig specifically into the AI question a lot more, the utility of it, the use of it, and I'm very fascinated. And here's kind of my wife is writing a new book right now, and she's using an AI agent to assist her a little bit, and I've been fascinated in the way that she's interacting with it. She
Mm,
is literally treating it like a valued friend.
yes.
Yeah, and the information she's getting in the in the form of feedback, in the form of suggestions. Now it's not writing anything for her, but she's going, yeah, how would this get positioned? I mean, that sort of stuff, and it's collegial, it's respectful, it's engaging, and I mean, there's just some things that are going on with that, and I'm finding that a lot of that is true in some of the work that I'm doing with some of the AI clients that I'm interacting with. I haven't used Claude yet. I'm going to start playing with that one
Yeah.
just to kind of see where this
Just
goes.
it just has the ethical foundation, which
Yeah, and that's why I'm
unfortunately,
intrigued by it. Yeah,
right, the other
good.
companies are a little lacking, in that, and that's important. Maybe the most important thing for our future and how it turns
Exactly.
out, right? So you
Well,
want
that's
to
why
pay
I've got you
attention.
on the show here. We're gonna we're gonna proselytize this. Where can people
Fantastic.
find out more about what you're up to?
Yeah, well, you can go to my website. It's my first and last name.com, Wade Chumney, WADECHUMNEY.com. And you can reach out to me on email at my first name, Wade.Chumney, my last name at csu.edu, or I'm sorry, csun.edu, csun.edu.
CSUN. Yeah.
And I'd be happy to interact, and talk about these ideas because I think it's so important to spread and share. And, if let me just say too, I've got a couple of podcasts I do. I have an AI Ethics Dude podcast where I'm talking about AI and ethics, consciousness in the future. Very intriguing topic. I have a Reflective Revolution podcast where I'm working with someone that's an expert in meditation and trying to talk about historical wisdom figures and how you can bring their practices into your daily life. And then I have a YouTube channel called The Consciousness Renaissance with AI capitalized in the middle. And that's like exactly what I'm talking about, raising your consciousness to deal with this AI and hopefully create a renaissance in this era because we can talk about the negatives all day long, and that's going to be what we talk about. But you can also plant the seeds for positivity and
Yeah.
what's possible. And we had a renaissance, several hundred years ago that transformed society for the better. We can do the same thing now, and we've got a tool, AI, that's beyond capable in making that happen. So that's what I'm trying to push for and what I'm trying to make happen in the various endeavors I'm involved in.
Wonderful. Folks, I want to thank you for listening. Wade Chumney, I want to thank you for being just a fascinating guest. I am going to have you back on the show, and we're going to sit down for coffee the next time I'm in your neck of the woods. I
Perfect.
want to have a long conversation. Sit long, talk much.
Awesome.
Folks, you've been listening to The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. And as always, in your life, find a way to be a center of distribution, not a center of accumulation. You're going to find your life works a whole lot better when you're taking that road. Trust me, you're a part of nature. Act like it.
Yeah.
Period. Mic drop.
Yes.
Okay. And we'll
Awesome.
see you on the next episode. Take care. Have a great rest of your week. This episode is sponsored by The Power of You, a leadership resource for entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, and anyone intent on developing their leadership impact and supercharging their career. For more information, check the podcast webpage or show notes. Hi, I'd like to ask you to do something for me if you wouldn't mind. If you like this episode, I'd like you to not only subscribe on your favorite site, but I'd also like you to give a rating. Ideally, a 5-star rating would be greatly appreciated. But I think more importantly also would be just some comments. That helps with the algorithm and it helps build the audience with this. And more than anything else, if you could invite somebody else to listen, just share this episode with a friend, with a colleague. And I'd like to see how we can grow the soul of business. I think it makes a difference. Thanks.